to the Exploress, time traveling through history, one era at a time. I'm Kate Armstrong. Today, I've got another Tudor-tastic interview for you, and it's one I'm absolutely delighted to share. Back in 2021, I spoke to Jennifer Kranz, producer on a musical called The King's Wife. It reimagines the relationship between Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, giving us a version of their story in which, through all that drama, they were actually great friends. Why haven't you heard about this fabulous show, you wonder? Because it's still in the process of being created. Jen and I will get into the show's origin story, the team behind it, and everything that goes into making a musical about women of the past. You're also in for a real treat because I'll be sharing one of the songs from the show with you in full. So make sure you listen all the way to the end. Grab some rose-tinted revisionist history glasses and a whole bunch of tissues. Let's go traveling. But first, a shout out to some of my patrons. My newest pirate queens, Regan, Sydney, and Alden. My newest lady president, Catherine R. My boss ladies, Tanya, Sarah S., Rebecca, Patricia, Nuria, Natalie, Monique, Michelle, Jessica, Sophie, and Julian, Grace, Elizabeth M., Elizabeth G., Annabelle, and Amy. My adventuresses, Terry, Stephanie, Kelly, Jo Marie, Jessica R., Iris, Emily, Carlos, and Anna. My warrior queens, Lori, Neve and Sloane, Kate and Alexis. My imperial empresses, Katie, Samara, Faye and Whimsy Soapworks, and Bridget. And my lady pharaohs, the fabulous Lauren and the amazing Courtneys. Patrons are such a huge part of what keeps the show going, and they get access to all sorts of goodies, giveaways, sneak peeks, early access to episodes, exclusive bonus episodes, full interviews with my guests, Q&As, all sorts of stuff. To learn more, just head over to my website. Hi, Jen. Welcome to the Exploress.
Hi, it's so great to be here. I'm very excited. Usually people want to talk to the writers, so thank you for wanting to. And they are the ones that deserve to, to be talked to the most. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. So I'm very excited to have you on the show to talk a little bit about the musical, the sort of developing musical, The King's Wife. But first, could you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. My name is Jennifer Kranz. I am from New York, and I am the creator and producer of The King's Wife. I'm a theater producer, and this is one of the projects I am working on, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, could you give us a bit of a pitch for The King's Wife?
Sure. It's about the first two wives of Henry VIII, and it's actually a retelling of their story. They actually were in real life very similar women. So we wanted to tell a story in which they discover each other in court and form this unusual, beautiful friendship. And then when push comes to shove and circumstances happen, the things history sort of happened, their friendship is they're sort of torn apart. So it's a story about what might have been between these two women. And it's a story about what happens to the world, how we lose out when great women aren't allowed to rise. And it's a story about female friendship and the importance of female friendship and how powerful it can be.
Mm. So where did the original idea for The King's Wife come from?
Well, like millions of women, I'm just a fan of the genre, millions of women all over the world, right? I'd read all the Alison Weir books and the Philippa Gregory books and watched the Tudors and the TV shows and movies, and had always been most enamored of the first two queens for whatever reason. Initially, I think everyone is enthralled with the conflict that Catherine and Anne had. I think people are sort of interested in the glorious catfight of it all, like what these women were had to be pitted against each other because Anne Boleyn was being put up for Catherine's job, essentially, after Catherine was unable to have a male heir, which was a very big deal at the time. So originally, I had just being a fan of the stories, I had wanted to tell a very straightforward story about the first two wives. But what had always frustrated me was how similar Catherine and Anne were. They were intellectual, strong women, ambitious. And my thought was if they were alive today, they'd be allies fighting for the same causes, whatever those causes would be. So that is what gave me the idea to have them discover each other at court and form this unlikely, strong, beautiful friendship. And in the show, the writers have created, and I have to call out the writers of The King's Wife, because I may have had the germ of the idea, but these two wonderful ladies have taken it to next level. Melissa Ennis is our book writer, and Jamie Floyd, who is a Grammy-nominated songwriter, is our composer lyricist. And they've just created this incredible, tear-jerking, moving story that is incredibly powerful about these two women.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that they're so similar, because I think you're absolutely right. They're similar in so many ways, but, history has painted them as very different and on opposite sides of a fight. Catherine's the pious, stubborn martyr, and Anne is the scheming seductress. And, you can never see them as friends. They're always adversaries, but they are very similar. And I could totally see a world in which, if circumstances had been different, their relationship could have been much different. So I imagine that it's a challenge with a show like this, where this is a story we think we know really well, and there's so much information out there about Anne and Catherine and about the world of the Tudor court. So how did you go about researching and looking at the historical information that we have and weaving that into the story, and how beholden did you feel to the research and the evidence that we have?
That's a great question. I'd already been, as a fan, I'd already read so many of the history books, and some of the books that pay a little bit less attention to the history, of course, too, but we really felt a responsibility to do Catherine and Anne justice and talk about the things that don't always come up throughout the course of the story. So, these women were pretty incredible, and the thing that gets reported mostly about them are negative. The fact that Catherine was, as Melissa puts it, our book writer, an incapable mother, not that she was a warrior, a great leader, and the king's most trusted counselor at the time. In fact, the Starz TV show, The Spanish Princess, which is based on the Philippa Gregory book, did a really good job of showing that side, her leading troops and her good decision-making and her loyalty in spite of all the things happening around her. And Anne, who's just typically painted, as you said, as this sort of, seductress and vixen, and she was the first wife to be executed really pretty barbarically. But she was an intelligent, clever, and very driven person in terms of charity and things that she wanted to do. She had all these interesting attributes. So these are the things that rise to the top of our story. Of course, there are things that happen in the history that we can't ignore. How Anne dies, and what happens to Catherine. That's in there. It's just that we are also bringing forth all the incredible qualities and deeds that these women did. So, of course, the historical record does influence the musical, but we're retelling aspects of it based on historical clues we saw in our research. For example, Catherine once said to her ladies about Anne, I'm going to butcher this quote, but hopefully not. Pray for her, because the time would come when you shall pity and lament her case. This is actually something that she said to her ladies when things were heating up. Now, was that Catherine being a Christian, or was there something else to it? Did she see another woman who, like her, had many gifts and little choice in all matters? And Anne was being pushed by her own father to pursue the king. She was sort of being pimped by her dad. So how do you escape that? How do you live in that world with no choice? So we do feel very married to the history, in that their endings don't change and the players are all the same. You'll see all the characters that are interesting to you. Henry's in it, Cromwell's in it, and there's a whole court full of really interesting personalities. But we're giving you a different point of view. And in this case, it's about a powerful friendship that might have been, a friendship that could have and probably should have existed.
And it's interesting that you talk about their lack of agency, their lack of choice, because I do think that's one of the aspects of this time period that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, is that these women were, these women had power, these women were intelligent, these women had fire, they had opinions, but they also lived in a world where women were meant to be pious and they were meant to always listen to the men in their lives. They were, meant to be obedient. And we see that as oppression, and I'm sure it felt like that sometimes, but also a woman's mindset at this time period about her place was very different than ours. So I'm wondering how you go about in crafting the musical, trying to be true to the time period and these women and the world that they were living in, but also coming at it with a fresh feminist perspective that people now can appreciate.
Yes, that is a great question. There is real relevance to their story here, looking at this story through a different lens. And, I'd be lying if I said that the Me Too movement did not come into play here, quite frankly. Initially I created the story outline and wanted to tell the story of the two queens, as I'd said, as a producer, you have to know how to put creative teams together. And I am not a writer. So I went out and found, spectacularly talented creatives. Again, Melissa Annis is originally from Wales, and she's a Brooklyn-based artist now and wonderful human. And we started to work on the story in an early draft before our equally wonderful Grammy-nominated composer Jamie Floyd came into the picture. And at first it was going to be about how Anne and Catherine become friends, and then Anne turns on Catherine because of their dire circumstances. It was sort of like a survival story. And Melissa, to her credit, said, no, let's expand, like in the wake of everything that was happening in the world. Let's expand on this beautiful notion of their friendship and not have them ever be in conflict. So we believe, our sort of take on this story is, although we're not saying this overtly, but we believe that essentially Anne Boleyn was sexually harassed into the job. Again, she did not have a choice. Henry's not someone that could or would be denied in any form. So what do you do in that case? There would have been repercussions for her. So with that in mind, we really advanced the story as that these women are never in conflict with each other. It's more that their friendship is destroyed because of circumstances beyond their control, a hostile patriarchal structure that existed in their world. As a woman, you were not in control of your destiny. You were married off to benefit your family, and then you became your husband's property. It was problematic if you did not bear sons. And that's what happened in both Catherine and Anne's circumstances. They birthed many children. Only one survived for each. Each had a daughter. And in Anne's case, that daughter happened to be Queen Elizabeth I, one of England's most powerful and successful monarchs. So by showing the strength and the integrity and the sort of unrelenting prowess of these women, that is how we were kind of showing the feminist perspective. We're also, showing how sort of the simple act of, when at one point Catherine is put on trial, and it's just so humiliating to her. She was this sort of woman of great stature and a powerful mind. And she's just so publicly humiliated. So we're sort of showing a lot of the injustice of it all. But through it all, they remain strong and dedicated to each other, as feminists should be. So that is how we tackle that. We're really, instead of romancing, creating a romantic notion of the Tudor times, we're actually saying that this was a terrible time for women. It was not a good time for women, even if you were the queen.
Yeah, it was not a great time for women. Tagline for most of history: not a great time for women.
I know.
But it is, it's a beautiful framework that you created for the show to say, let's put them on the same side. Let's make them friends of a sort. Let's have them care for each other. Because like you said before, they are so similar in so many ways, and they go through so many of the same heartbreaks. They're both women. There's such pressure for them to bear sons, and then they can't. They both have miscarriages. They both have such dreadful disappointments.
And they say, imagine the pressure of that. I wouldn't be able to imagine the pressure of that. Like, this is the one job that you have, and you better do it, and you have no way of controlling that.
Yeah, and to have your fertility and to have the workings of your body and your ability to procreate be on such public display at all times. The pressure they would have felt and the stress that would have created, it's just almost unfathomable. And as you say, women at this time, even women with money, even women in positions of power, didn't have a lot of choice. And that's hard for us we always want to see agency in the stories of these women. And there is some agency, but they were living in such a different time. And Anne Boleyn, I think it's a really, really interesting perspective to look at her at someone who was essentially bullied into marrying Henry VIII and someone who was sexually assaulted. Henry pursued her really hard and she put him off for a long, long time. But what choice did she have? What choices did she have? When the king pursues you, what do you do?
And we sort of, again, some of the depictions, because we don't really know exactly what happened, and all the accounts were written by, not women, really. So we don't really know what happened to Anne. History paints her as she went after the king, but it was like, do that or what was going to happen to you. You don't have any other choice. The king has his eye on you. Is this something she wanted? Or, she didn't know any other way to be. So, and if your father is telling you to do this, go after this, what do you say? She just had really no power in the situation at all. So it's a really, really interesting example of a woman just being powerless. And, either she was playing the game or she was just doing what she had to do.
That's right. And then you look at Catherine, who also didn't have a lot of agency and had to watch her position as queen and her marriage crumble. And there was very little she could do. But she used what agency she had to say, no, I'm not going to go quietly into the night. No, I'm not going to go along with this because I don't believe it's true. I don't believe it's right. We were married. We are married, and I'm never going to say otherwise. And she suffered so much because of that choice, but I really admire that she stuck to her guns and refused to go along.
Yeah, essentially they wanted to take away her name. And she, if you know the history of Catherine, she was actually married to Henry's brother, initially Arthur, and he died at a very young age. They were married at a very young age, and she claimed, and it's disputed as to whether it was true or not, but she claimed that she had not laid with her first husband, meaning, she was a virgin, so she could marry Henry, and Henry's father was very interested in the large dowry she brought with her from Spain. So the two were married. So she had, from the very beginning, she set foot in England. It was an uphill struggle to maintain her position, to do the right thing by her first husband. And then she actually was in kind of an exile in England for several years while they worked out the dowry issue. She was just being horse traded, really, she had to leave her home behind. So it's very interesting how what these two women were able to withstand, what you had to withstand as a woman at that time. I mean, there's plenty that we have to withstand today as women, obviously, still all women. But it was a different story back then.
Yeah, that's right. Just they had to withstand so much. And I think, too, we often forget that Catherine married Henry's older brother and then had that time where she was essentially in exile and in limbo and didn't know what was going to happen to her. And Henry VII didn't want his son Henry to marry her. He was shopping around for other women because she'd kind of lost some of her allure by that point. But then Henry VII died, and Henry VIII actually chose Catherine. It seems that he really did love her, and she loved him, and that they wanted to be together. And it just makes it that much more sad that several years down the line that she was shoved aside and humiliated the way she was.
It does. And in the show, we show that they have a mutual, whether or not you call it love, but like a really mutual enjoyment of each other. They appreciate, they have this fun competition. I won't say exactly what it is, but they really enjoy each other. And Henry kind of appreciates her talents until a certain point, until she's just deemed unable to have a male child. And that's when everything changes for her.
Yes. I was just thinking about, for everyone listening, if you go onto the King's Wife Instagram account, you can actually get some little sneak peeks and snippets of songs as they're developing, and you should definitely go check them out because they are amazing. And we'll talk more about the music in a minute. But there's one particular song. I can't remember the title, but it's essentially women of the court singing about how, well, I could shut up and be the queen.
Yes,
I could be quiet and just be beautiful and wear the jewels. And, I won't complain. I won't have opinions. I could shut up and be the queen. And it's a really fun, catchy song, but it's also like, whoa, there's a dark underside to that, which is, these first two queens refused to shut up and refused to be quiet and to go along. And they suffered because of that. And it just is sort of this glimpse into what it meant to be a woman in the court, and that if you couldn't go along or wouldn't go along, what there were really dire consequences, obviously. Catherine essentially dies in exile and Anne is beheaded. So
yeah. And I'm glad you enjoyed the song, and you're 100% right. Jamie is known for writing these beautiful ballads in the music industry, but with The King's Wife, she has, sort of turned this fabulous corner and written all these incredibly cool, fun, but still dark musical theater songs. So I Could Shut Up is this cool rockin', song. And again, you can hear it on the Instagram at The King's Wife Musical is the handle, that the ladies sing when they're getting annoyed that the king isn't paying attention to them, and I Could Shut Up is just this really, really fun song that kind of depicts that and how frustrated they are.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit about the development of the musical. I'm interested in the process, because obviously you're juggling a lot of different things. So this is a story about women who actually existed, people who actually existed, and there's a lot of historical evidence, but you're also putting your own spin on it and, fleshing it out. So what is the process like in terms of what comes first? Is it, story writing? Is it crafting the music? How does it all come together? What's the process look like?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So every musical is different, and everything sort of germinates differently. In this case, I had an idea and I needed to find the right writer. And I was referred to Melissa, and I'd read a lot of writers, but I just sort of read her a couple of plays by her, and got to know her voice, as we say, and I just was floored by her ability to take you to a place, a different time and space. She takes you into a period, and she doesn't only write period pieces, but she takes you into a period and you feel like you're transported to somewhere else, but at the same time her language and her visuals and her humor are so contemporary that there's a very sort of modern filter to it. So I had to I wanted to, and Melissa had never written a musical before, but she had always wanted to. So we spent a bit of time together, just sort of getting the initial story down. And of course that's changed. Everything changes up until opening night, quite frankly. But about a year into it, we said, okay, I think we're really ready to bring a composer into this, because, Melissa was sort of, again, she's a genius writer, but she was sort of digging her feet into the sand and really feeling her way around how to write a musical. So, which is a little bit different than writing a play. So a friend of mine in LA, a music supervisor in LA, had said, you really need to talk to this woman, Jamie Floyd. She's incredible. And a lovely person, all of which is entirely true. And she's an incredible songwriter. And Melissa and I just listened to a couple of her songs. And I mean, I had listened to dozens of writers, all wonderfully talented, but just not the right voice for The King's Wife. So we heard Jamie's stuff, and within 2 songs, we were like, oh my goodness, we have to talk to Jamie. And she just really had such an enthusiasm for the material, and had so many good ideas. And her and Melissa, the most important thing, again, as a producer, you have to be able to see that a team is going to be able to work together. And her and Melissa just really hit it off, and we're kind of ideating from the start. And they're both such lovely people that they, I could really see that they would do what it took to make it work. And then they were off and running, so in a very short amount of time, comparatively, we have a really strong story, and I want to say, between 15 and 20 songs, depending on what's in and out on any given day, because you write new songs, you get rid of other songs, you bring songs back, that sort of thing. So that's been the process. And we have a workshop of the show coming up at a very prestigious American theater called Playwrights Horizons. We're very excited that they're giving us some time, and that's their way of checking it out to see if they want to do a production of it. So we're readying for that in January. Unfortunately, due to COVID, of course, it was pushed back about 3 times. But yeah, we're very excited about that. So the team just continues to work. We've also added a fantastic director by the name of Tamala Woodard, who is so talented and such a good leader. So she's been a fabulous addition to the team. She's also, brought a fresh mind to things, which is great. And a fantastic music director by the name of Brandon Bush. And Tamala really had to convince me and my wonderful producing partner, Abigail Rose Solomon, to, take a man onto the team. We're like, no, this is an all-female creative team. Come on, and she's like, I totally get it, but Brandon is so great. He's a feminist. And I've worked with him on other, very important. You have to be feminist to work on the show. And I worked with him on other musicals, and he will speak Jamie's language. He's from the music industry. Brandon is like, if you pick up an album, he has potentially played on it. He is in a band called Sugarland. His brother is Christian Bush. And he has just done a lot of really interesting things. He was in the band Train, and he's sort of had a very interesting career and brings an incredible skill set to the team. And he and Jamie had a shorthand very quickly. And then Tamala is sort of, getting in there and working with them, and again, adding a fresh mind to the story building, which is very important. Adding a director, it was just sort of Melissa and Jamie and I for so long, and now we're adding other artists to the mix. So again, you have to be really scrupulous about who you add, and you have to look at everybody's temperaments and skill sets. And I just think we have the best team.
That's really exciting. And yeah. I imagine that is such a special skill to be able to bring people together who are going to meld well, because fresh voices and opinions are good, but you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. It's got to be a really fine balance to strike.
Yeah, again, right, you do. And as a producer, you have to sort of realize what the team needs at certain times. Sometimes you have to say no, which is not my favorite thing to do, but there's, and you have to just really make sure that they're getting what they need, and that they can continue to work the way they need to. Getting them time with theaters, and getting them places that they can work, and figuring out how they can be together, et cetera. And, assessing the progress. As a producer, you have to know when it's time to step back. Now that we have this really incredible director, and she can lead the team creatively and help dramaturg the material, so that, me and Abigail can go out and do what we need to do as producers.
So let's talk a little bit about the music specifically. So you said, okay. I think that you all have 15 or 20 songs somewhere around there coming and going at the moment.
Right. Depending on what version of the script that we're looking at, yeah.
Yes. So one song that...
I have to say, they're all incredible. Jamie has done such a good job. I know I sound like a proud mother, but all the babies are beautiful.
Well, everything I've heard has been amazing. And I'm sure listeners, if you haven't heard any of it yet, after you're done with this, go and listen, because they're going to get stuck in your head and you're going to be singing them for days. I often hum the songs to myself while I'm doing the dishes, and it's glorious. So we're actually going to, after this interview, we're going to listen to one specific song called I Know You. We're going to listen to this specific song, and I'm wondering if you can tell us anything about what this song is about and how it came to be.
Absolutely. So it was, Jamie and Melissa kind of sitting around, and we come to the determination. Catherine suffers a tragedy in the story. I won't tell you what, but she goes through a very hard time, and Anne is trying to comfort her. And there was this beautiful conversation between Jamie and Melissa, and Jamie said, what does Anne want to say to Catherine? And Melissa was like, she's really trying to say, you can do this. I know you, and Jamie just sort of took that and came up with this extraordinary ballad that is just, it's so beautiful. And it's a song about helping to get a friend back on their feet after you've suffered a tragedy. Jamie's specialty, again, in the music industry is beautiful ballads. And this is just sort of, this would be a hallmark for her. So we're very proud of the song. It's the first promotional single we've released. It's on iTunes and Spotify. And yeah, we really hope you enjoy it.
And it is, as you'll all hear in a minute, it's sad, but beautiful. And there's a chord in the song that I feel like is in all the music from this musical. It feels so relevant. It's like, this is a story about women who lived a long time ago and lived in many ways in a different world from us. But every single song really strikes to the heart, to me, of some of the struggles of being a woman, the frustrations of being a woman, and about, as you said, about female friendship and the power, the power of female friendship and what it can do. So I'm wondering why you think we're still so obsessed with the Tudors and with these women specifically. Why do we keep returning to their stories? Why are they still relevant for us now?
That is such an interesting question. I think, unfortunately, most people are intrigued by the cruder aspects of the story. What did one woman do to get thrown out of her job and exiled from her only child? And again, just as an aside, there's the brutality, right? Like, this woman was taken away. Catherine was never allowed to see her daughter Mary ever again. So what did she do that was so horrible? What did Anne do to face the executioner and lose her head? There's almost a mystique about them in a way. But again, because women were not in charge of their own destinies and did not write their own stories at the time, the stuff that gets reported on is the darker, uglier stuff. There's actually a famous quote by Thomas Cromwell, who figures prominently in our story as someone Catherine must fight against, and that was true in history as well. And what he said was, nature wronged her in not making her a man, but for her sex, she would have surpassed all the heroes of history. So even Cromwell was really impressed with Catherine, though he saw fit to help, take her out. He didn't think her legacy was worth anything, though he thought she was an extremely formidable, person, warrior. She had everything it took to be a leader.
Speaking of other characters that feature in the story, I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about who else shows up in the musical. And I know one of the prominent characters is actually Catherine's daughter, Mary. So can you tell us a little bit about Mary's role in the play and why you all decided to feature her prominently?
Yeah, actually, that is all, that is all Melissa and Jamie. Initially, she was not in the show, and they're like, we need Mary to be in the show. They were like, we need Mary to be in the show. So Mary starts out the show as a happy, excited teen. She's like 12 or 13 initially, and we see her age a couple of years and become a very, very bitter young woman because she sees what happens to her mother. But when we meet her, she's this sort of angsty teen that is in France and is she's there to marry to be betrothed to the Dauphin of France. And she's kind of like, she's just not doing well. She's sort of not adapting well to the culture, and people don't really like her. And she's sort of, unhappy and writing home to her mother, like, what do I do? So Jamie came up with this amazing way to have Mary communicate with her mom through letters. And it's a series of songs about how she's doing in France. And initially, the first part of the song that she sings, it's sort of like the King George character in Hamilton that comes in and out, when you hear her story that way, although she figures more prominently in the story than he does. But the first part of the story through song that she sings it's called I'm Bombing in France. And it's about how she's not doing well. Mm-hmm. And then the next part, Anne talks to Catherine and gives her some advice because Anne has lived in the French court. And this is how Anne and Catherine start to bond. So Mary is given this advice and she starts to do better in France. So the next part of the song is called France is the Bomb.
And you can actually hear a little bit of that one on Instagram as well, which is great.
It is on Instagram and it's great. I mean, Jamie just murdered it. It was great. But ultimately, what we see with Mary is that she, gets moved around. She gets horse traded, kind of like, other women in the court. No, we're going to remove you from, we're not going to have you marry the Dauphin of France because we need you to marry someone else. As her mother's fortunes declined, so did hers. So she sees what's happening to her mother ultimately, and it's very difficult for her. And she becomes embittered, which is the exact opposite of how we meet her, you know. So one of the reasons why we really discovered that Mary was so important to the story is that she's yet another example of a wasted, interesting female. You know, she was a smart woman. She had some interesting attributes. She potentially could have been a great leader. And she did do some interesting things as queen. However, she earned the nickname Bloody Mary because the first thing that she did when she assumed the throne after her father died, not having a male heir after 6 wives, the first thing that she did was take out her enemies. That was her first act. She started, going after the Protestants. We don't really get too much into religion in the show because that's not the message of the show. And we don't get into what happens to Mary afterward. But, that's the first thing she did in history. She was so angry. She saw fit to just start, taking out Protestants and murdering people of a certain religious faith. So yeah, and it's because she was so embittered and so angry at what happened to her mother.
And to herself as well. I mean, she was quite staunchly Catholic, just like her mother was very staunchly Catholic. But you can see how she arrived where she did by the time she became queen. I mean, if you think about it, she was witness to the rise and fall of not only her own mother, which must have been devastating, but also every single stepmom who came after, some of whom she was quite close to.
Yeah.
And with every one of those rises and falls, Mary's life was impacted as well. She must have been incredibly frustrated and bitter. And, I think it's another example of, as you say, a woman who was intelligent and full of fire and could have done so much and did so much, but was so impacted by her circumstances and by what happened to her. So we often only see and talk about the end of her life and her reign, but I think there's just so much to explore about her young life and what it was like growing up as the daughter of Henry VIII. So
Right.
I'm really excited to see how that, how she manifests in the show.
Yeah. She's a great character in the show. She's a great character.
And I have to ask, even though I almost don't want to bring him up, but obviously Henry VIII plays quite a vital role in this history. He's very involved. So does he show up much in the show, and how does he show up?
He does. He actually had a smaller part initially, and we have increased his role. It was sort of like, we don't want to give the men too many things to say, but actually you can't tell the story without Henry VIII figuring prominently into it. So he is in it. He's a really sort of fun, charismatic character. Although we know he's dangerous, we know that he is not a good man and dangerous. And you're sort of, as a person that exists in the court, you're subject to his whims, whatever they may be. So he has a couple of songs in the musical actually that are being birthed right now. At this juncture, and again, things always change when things are in development, but the court is singing about something that he messed up while Catherine was out sort of leading troops in a successful campaign, which actually happened. Henry went out and sort of messed up, storming the castle somewhere, basically. But he comes back and Catherine's like, we got to spin this, and make it look like it was a success. So it's a story about how his failure actually, via a game of telephone through the court, becomes this incredible success. And later on, I believe that the ladies are giving him a song when he realizes that he can be the king of everything. He can be more powerful than church, more powerful than the Pope, that sort of thing. So he's really actually more and more providing some comic relief. However, you are always aware that he's a dangerous character. You're always aware that you are under his thumb if you live in the court. And he is the last word on everything. So, but he's actually become a really, really fun character in the show.
And would you say in the show, does he come across as a sympathetic character at all? Or do you think he's really comes across as the villain or a little bit of both?
That's a great question. I think Jamie and Melissa have worked really hard not to make him just, basically bad. Like he's what they're feeling is that he was born into a job that he really wasn't that well qualified for. He was sort of more of an artist. He loved to play instruments and write and this and that. And not that you can't do that and also be king, but he just, wasn't always that great at his job without getting into all the detail and millions of examples. And that day you were kind of born into the job. So their take is that he's just not the right person for the job. And potentially Catherine was, but she couldn't be because she was a girl. So
yeah, because she was raised to be a leader from the very beginning. I mean, she was the daughter of Isabella and Ferdinand. And she was like she was a ruler in her own right, her mother. And such a powerful example, and raised her daughter knowing that she would also be a leader and she would also be a powerful queen. So she really was raised to rule in a way that Henry wasn't.
Yeah, the opening number of the show right now, it's the opening number, again, it could change, but is a song called I Should Be Queen. And it opens with Catherine leading those troops into that battle at Flodden. And it's a song about how she's right where she belongs. This is what I should be doing. She's proud to be smart and powerful. She's proud of her position. She revels in it, and she's ambitious and interesting.
So let's say that someone is sitting down and they watch the musical and they're walking out of the theater. What are some
love it?
I mean, obviously we want them to love it, and they obviously will love it because it's going to be amazing.
Yes, I think so. It's quite good.
For sure. What are some of the things that you would ideally like someone to walk away thinking about?
I think we want them to walk away with a different idea about what these women went through. It was not really a romantic time. And I think that we want them to walk away with an idea of what could have been, sort of like, wow, had these women been allowed to be who they were, really great things might have come of it. And mainly, I think that we want them to see that when great women are not allowed to rise, or any women are not allowed to rise, the whole world suffers. The whole world suffers. And of course, we want them to be, talking about the story and singing the songs when they leave the theater and telling friends about it. So
wonderful. Well, can you tell us anything about how the musical is coming along and when we might actually be able to go and enjoy it in person?
Yes. Well, of course, unfortunately, COVID has really, delayed things quite a bit for all musical theater. Broadway is just starting to come back. So it has put things back, I would say, by at least a year or two, sadly. However, in the pandemic, the team has been extremely productive. So when we do have the offer of a production, we will be in good shape. We will be like, I wouldn't say ready to go, but we will be on our way to being ready to go. So the workshop that we're doing with Playwrights Horizons is in January. And shortly thereafter, we should know what our first production will be. We have conversations happening with Australia and with the UK and with other theaters, around the country. So we'll see, it's really, there's just so much up in the air right now, unfortunately, with the virus. And of course, the devastation that it's caused, theater has been devastated, and there's been a lot of, lives and families devastated by it. So we're just grateful that, everybody on the team is well and has gotten through it. And we continue to work. But we're really excited about it.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about it too.
Yeah, it's pretty special. It's pretty special. It's a dark story, but there's, Melissa and Jamie have infused such levity into it. There's laugh out loud moments in it, and it's so moving. You really begin to mourn for what could have been with these two great minds, these two interesting women.
And what a beautiful thing to be able to do, to bring these incredible women to the forefront and tell their story in a new way, and in a way that makes them more complex and more human. We often see them as caricatures or cardboard cutouts, and we see them always in relation to the man that they married. But they're so much more than that. And I think to reimagine them as friends and as two women who fight for each other and stand by each other is just so moving and beautiful. And you really feel that resonance in every single song. So it's going to be incredible. I can't wait to see it.
Oh, that's so lovely to hear. Thank you. We really appreciate it. I mean, you'll hear it in the lyrics. There's a great line from the song. I know you've got something there. They can't touch so much more than enough. And it's sort of very evocative of the message of the show, really.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating conversation, and I can't wait for all of my listeners to discover The King's Wife and follow along as it develops.
Oh, it was a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for having me, Kate, and I love the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much to Jen for joining us. The King's Wife has resumed development in full force after the long stall that was the pandemic, and they just completed their first workshop with the famed Playwrights Horizons in New York. Next up, they're headed to Seattle for another workshop with the Village Theater, another step along the path to their first production. You can add I Know You, the song that you're about to hear, right now to your playlist on Spotify. And you can follow along with the development of The King's Wife and hear excerpts from other amazing songs on Instagram at The King's Wife Musical. And now, as promised, let's listen to I Know You. I hope you're ready to have some feelings about it. Get your tissues out. That's all I'm gonna say.
I wish that I could take all your pain away. I don't know this cruel heartache, but I know you're stronger than all the saddest days that keep coming your way. I don't know what to say. Oh, but if I could, I would change this so your heart could be weightless. I don't know you're hurt like you do, but I know you. And all that I can see is that you are evergreen. You will live to live your dreams. I just know it, 'cause you've got something they can't touch, so much more than enough. I know what you're